Welcome to episode 231 of the Ageist podcast. Today we're connecting with someone I've known for quite a while. We profiled him back a few years ago. Craig Cooper. He's an entrepreneur, wellness innovator at Connect Health, and the author of a book that we talked about a few years ago called Your New Prime, 30 Days to Better Sex, Eternal Life, and Kick-Ass Life After 40. Who doesn't want that? But more than that, Craig is a walking example of what's possible when we take aging seriously. Early diagnosis, precision fitness, targeted longevity, tech, and living with intention.
Problem is the traditional medical industry, if you get osteoporosis, what do they tell you? Take calcium and vitamin D. That's basically it, right? It's just a recipe for failure. I've had doctors come out of UCLA to look at what I've been doing. They've never seen this sort of switch that I've been able to execute on my bone health over the course of 5 years. Hormonally, long, slow distance just sucks your manhood. I increased my weight loading in my exercise, just loading up as heavy as I can,
In this conversation, we get into everything from bone health, which is top of mind for me. Can you imagine all the stuff I do? I'm actually suffering from osteopenia. So we're going to talk about what to do about that. We're going to talk about blood pressure. We're going to talk about hormone optimization and cardiovascular risk. Cardiovascular risk is the number one killer of people around the world. So something to think about. We've got some new tests to talk about there. And yes, we're even going to talk about compression socks and macadamia milk. How does that intersect with osteopenia? We're going to let you know. Craig has done a lot of hard work on himself, and now he's helping others through his company, Connect Health. It's a tech-forward approach to better aging, especially some very interesting things about cardiovascular health. So really quick, before you dive in, are you part of the Ageist community? If not, head over to ageist.com/newsletter. Join us. Get our newsletter. It's best in class. We work on it really hard, and you get it free to your inbox every Thursday. And if you enjoy this show, please help us spread the word. Subscribe, leave us a review, follow us at We Are Ageist on Instagram, and share this episode with a friend. The more we grow, the more insight and expert advice we can share to keep you thriving. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Lately, I've been ending my day lying on something that looks like tech, but feels like therapy. The Bond Charge Infrared PEMF mat combines pulsed electromagnetic fields with infrared heat to help my body recover, reset, and just feel better. 10 minutes and the stress melts. It's like giving your nervous system a deep exhale. Check it out at bondcharge.com and use the code AGEIST15 for 15% off.
Today's show is also brought to you by Timeline Nutrition with their breakthrough product, MitoPure, the first clinically tested urolithin A supplement, which is showing tremendous results for mitochondrial health. Go to timelinenutrition.com/ageist, use the code AGEIST at checkout, and save 10% off your first order of MitoPure. Today's show is also brought to you by Our Place. I've just started using some of their pots and pans. Oh my God. Okay, so they're beautiful, and guess what? They don't have any of those nasty chemical coatings on them that are, unfortunately, forever chemicals. I don't want to be eating that stuff. You don't either. Go to FromOurPlace.com, enter the code AGEIST at checkout, receive 10% off site-wide. Our Place offers a 100-day trial with free shipping and returns.
Craig's got some cutting-edge ideas on health span and longevity. So let's give him a call and find out what he's been up to. Craig, good to see you. Where does this podcast find you today?
David, it's where I first met you in Newport Beach, California.
Oh my gosh. One of the more beautiful places on earth. What was that? We looked at the calendars like 7 or 8 years ago.
I know, it's crazy. We did a shoot down the beach at Crystal Cove. It was amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful spot.
My
too.
hair was like twice as long.
Yeah, you had sort of a hippie thing going. I remember that.
We did a good photo shoot. I think you guys profiled me in the magazine. Congratulations, by the way, on everything. I think
Thank you.
you guys were way ahead of the curve on this. Just in terms of, I think everything that you were, driving from a media perspective around, aging lifestyles, longevity. So I like to think that a lot of people have caught up with me. So I think, we're in that same boat.
Thank you. Sometimes being leader is not always best, but
Yeah. Shutterfly and all the, 50 social media sites before Facebook, right?
yeah. Tell us first. So we met because you wrote a book back when maybe 8 or so years ago. What was that book?
Yeah, the book was called Your New Prime, 30 Days to Better Sex, Eternal Strength, and a Kick-Ass Life After 40. I was in my mid-50s at the time when we met. But, really it was you look back, it was really a passion project that was driven by sort of two sort of aspects. One is really my own history and, growing up, I had a very, very sick childhood. I had encephalitis when I was 9. I was in a coma for a month. I had osteomyelitis when I was 11. I nearly lost my left leg. Pericarditis when I was 18. This is an inflammatory disorder of the heart, which I had open heart surgery when I was 18. It's kind of like funny when I look back to where I am now and corporately, everything that I'm advocating and developing from a medical technology perspective. When I look back to sort of a young 18-year-old, living on the Gold Coast of Australia, working in restaurants and, surfing every day, how that health scare, well, I definitely know it impacted me for everything I've done in my life. But, specifically, having, those sort of early stage struggles with heart disease, I think, was pretty impactful for me. So all of them viral itis, encephalitis, pericarditis, osteomyelitis, and then, really throughout my life, I'm 62 now, we met when I was, in my mid 50s, just much more clarity and focus as I age around sort of aging metabolic disorders, how from a personal perspective, and really, I would say from a selfish perspective initially in terms of driving my own health. And then in the book, really translating that into messaging, which is, clear for a certain demographic that really wasn't being taken account of. When you look at Men's Health magazine, every month it's, abs and biceps, the narrative on the 6 o'clock news, every night is, sound bites around, pretty generic health aspects, which are population wide and really not specifically focused for guys like you and me. So I really, wanted to look at what I could do to educate and communicate around, mental, sexual, emotional, nutritional, physical health, around those things which really mattered to us as, at the time in my 50s and now in my 60s, even more, which are very, very unique and specific to us in terms of, what we face, the challenges, and, across the board from a sort of health paradigm perspective. And, really when I talk about that, it's, as this is just not about physical health. This is just a whole spectrum of factors which come into being healthy, and as we know, as we age, our hormonal health, our sexual health, and when you're speaking about men, our urinary health, our mental health from the point of view of just dealing with the mental challenges as we age, as well as from the point of view of metabolic disease with Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. So these are the things that I wanted to bring, front forward for a community which, I really didn't think was being sort of served and communicated sufficiently to.
Right on. Now you're in your 60s.
Yeah.
So, what's changed for you? How do you approach your exercise, your diet, your day differently now in your 60s than you did in your 50s?
Yeah, I think when we met, like I was full on charging in Spartan races and, training to, max failure and, long endurance events, and nutritionally, I was fueling myself really for that regime. So, I think, I remember writing an article for the Huffington Post about things I'm doing in my 50s, which I didn't do in my 40s. So it's a, super interesting question, David. So I think a training perspective, I still have sort of outside goals in terms of, events that I love doing. But, I think from a strength training perspective, I'm really training more for sufficient strength, not so much maximum strength nowadays. So, if you look at it, probably a good analogy on a scale of, doing 10 reps at the gym, I always do 8 now, kind of have that mental sort of 80%. So I never train to failure. I do, very focused, intense, weight training sessions every day, as a priority. I do a lot of, short intensive cardio, whether it's, VO2 max style events, in the pool or, mountain biking or other cardiovascular exercise. And what I don't do and what's important is I don't do many long, slow distance or sort of zone one events anymore. Cause, when you look at it across the board from a science perspective, all the published research, and if you just look anecdotally at someone like, Ryan Hall, the marathoner, who really had to drop out of marathons because he was, hypergonadal. His testosterone basically went to like literally zero. Uh, Now he's a jacked CrossFitter, but he was, half the weight he was. So hormonally, long, slow distance just really just sucks your manhood. So, really try and avoid exhausting myself. And most of that through long, slow distance. So that's from an exercise perspective. I mean, I can, dive a little bit deeper on that if you want. I'm not fasting anymore. I was definitely doing a lot of fasting when we first met. So I've got a bone issue, which is, a lot of men have, post 50, but it's very undiagnosed in men because men traditionally don't get DEXA scans. And, you see all the marketing, it's all to women. It's all menopausal, very, very limited marketing to men around bone health. So I've been super focused on my bone health because I'm sort of like on the border of osteopenia. So I've really turned that around in the last 5 years. It's really been a medical miracle what I've been able to do from the point of view of bone health. I mean, I've had doctors come out of UCLA to look at what I've been doing just from the perspective that they've never seen this sort of switch that I've been able to execute on my bone health over the course of 5 years. So bone health is super important. Really, a lot of my training, David, is training to avoid frailty as I age. So bone health is a big part of that. Mobility, strength, balance. I train myself to be like an oak tree, not a reed. I do no flexibility exercise. I'd rather have tensile strength rather than being able to do, a perfect downward dog, for example. I want to have tensile strength. So when I move, I'm off balance, when I step off a curb wrong, things like that. All the things that like take you out of life, which, as we age, we kind of, we just don't have the time to, have downtime, right? So I I train a lot to avoid frailty. And it's interesting as I look back at my book because one of the interviews I did with the head performance coach at Stanford at the time, talking about his training regime for his athletes. One of the comments that I remember him telling me, which I referenced in the book, is that his main job is to ensure that his athletes don't put their back out when they're getting the groceries out of the back of the car. He said, the rest is pretty much taken care of. He said, but I just want to keep them on the field, avoid injury. And so, for me, that's a big part going forward. I want to keep thriving. I want to keep in the game. I want to avoid injury because, traditionally when we met, my life was just a roller coaster of, injury to recovery and, being out of the game. And it just wasn't sustainable. And I had back surgery since I saw you. So really that was a lifetime of load and intensity that built up on me. And we're seeing a lot of that now with a lot of aging, performance athletes as they get into their 50s, not just sort of metabolically. We saw an example of Dave Scott at the beginning of the year, the 6 times Ironman, who had double ablation surgery for his heart. And it sort of came out that he had sort of 5 years of serious heart issues before that, mostly put down to intensity and load. And we're seeing that across the board now. So I was asked the other day on a podcast of what I'd tell my, 40-year-old self. And one of the answers was, it is all going to catch up with me, right? It is going to catch up with me, no matter what it is, back, knee, shoulders, whatever your sport, it's going to catch up with you. I wouldn't change anything, David, but, we're seeing that more and more. And I think specifically from the perspective of cardiovascular health, when you look at the stats around that, not just at our age, we're seeing 66% increase in 18 to 44-year-old cardiovascular disease, 38% increase in blood pressure deaths over the last 5 years, but specifically in relation to into college athletes, it's the number one killer now of college athletes, cardiovascular disease. It's crazy, right? So
What's up with that?
it's a bunch of things. They put it down partly demographic because there's a huge weighting towards Afro Americans in sport. So partly demographic to Afro Americans. Heat stress, COVID has been blamed, undiagnosed cardiovascular disease. So people aren't going into the funnel of diagnostics early enough because like colonoscopies, like prostate cancer, cardiovascular disease is seen as an old person's disease. And it's very rare to see statistics around young people with cardiovascular disease. So they clarify young, believe it or not, as 18 to 44. So that's the statistic that I referenced. So the last 3 years, 66% increased in that demographic. So for me and everything I'm doing now, I'm just, I think, from the point of view of, communicating, educating around these disorders. And then, from the perspective of my business, developing, technology in order to allow sort of deep insights and monitoring so we can catch people sort of much earlier in the lifespan. So a couple more points, just to your original question. So I'm limiting what I call anabolic triggers a lot more. So I was sort of, heavily indexing on protein. So, I'm 90 pounds at the moment. I think at the time I was eating, over 200, 220 grams of protein a day, which is kind of like the max. In my book, I point out it's kind of like a gram per pound, I should say. But, I'm very cautious of insulin growth factor 1, IGF-1, and its impact on sort of the anabolic pathways, and proteins are a trigger for that. It's a bit of a paradox because it's good for heart disease, not so good for anabolic triggers. And really, my main concern is in regards to prostate health. So for guys like us, we want to avoid any anabolic triggers, really growth hormones that are going to fuel any sort of nascent cancers. Minimizing, or I would say sufficient protein, not super sufficient protein, is really where I'm at the moment with that. So I have about 100 grams a day. I'm lucky. I've had, very solid muscle mass since I've been young, and I easily put on muscle. My testosterone at 62 is 854 nanograms per deciliter. So, the scale from a 20-year-old to the end is 0 to 900. So it's a problem. So it means that I have this sort of anabolic growth syndrome. So I need to be able to make sure that I don't sort of supercharge that and sort of like flip that switch epigenetically too much. So I avoid excess protein. And then really, lastly, I'm really focused on the metabolic disorders that we suffer as again, males as we age, urinary health, mental health, sexual health. So, with, supplements and, diet and, how I train and just impacting those, which are sort of more and more of a priority. It's not, I'm in pretty good shape, but, it's not important to me to be like, I was before. I'm more about, how do I live my life purposefully and thrive the best I can in terms of what I kind of frame as, longevity, which is kind of I have my own sort of definition around that.
Okay, so there's a lot there.
I'll keep the other answers short.
Let's go back. Talk to me about bone health. You were borderline osteopenia,
Yeah.
and now you're not. What did you do?
Yeah, so I found out about 23 years ago when I first came to the United States that I was osteopenic at that point. It's crazy. I had a life of professional skateboarding. I've been bounced off reefs in Tavarua surfing. I've had massive impact over the life of my, athletic, endeavors and, everything else I do. So that was a shock. And then over the course of the last sort of, up until 5 years ago, it just got progressively worse, which was kind of crazy considering what I was doing with when you look at my, training regime and my focus on, my lifestyle factors. So, but it wasn't 100% focus for me. It wasn't like a super priority until about 5 years ago. I tipped into osteoporotic, right? And so went through all the hormone tests, thyroid, testosterone, estrogen's a big part of it, a whole bunch of other tests. No one could work it out. Very, very few drugs were available for osteoporosis, and only one of them was available for men. And I'll talk to you about that in a sec. 5 years ago, it just became a laser focus for me, right? Because I saw, all the stats around hip fractures, spine fractures, end cause mortality events if you break your hip. You look at, post 60, I think lifespan's like traditionally like 5 or 6 years if you break a hip, as we're aging. So, okay, this was the real deal. I needed to like get serious around it, right? So my endocrinologist brought a bunch of physicians out of UCLA and other facilities to try and sort of work out what was going on, and no one could work it out, right? So I was left to myself. So I did two things. So I increased my weight loading in my exercise. And this is not, when I say that, I don't mean I'm lifting stuff above my head or anything like that. This is mainly my weight bearing exercise. So, and most of it through carries, David. So do a lot of farmer carries, just loading up as heavy as I can, 70 pounds in each hand, kettlebells, and just walking for like, 50 meters and stuff. Do that religiously every day. Just put massive gravitational load on my body, because the problem is the traditional medical industry. If you get osteoporosis, what do they tell you? Take calcium and vitamin D. That's basically it, right? It's just a recipe for failure. So I did a super deep dive on it, all the studies around calcium, which by the way doesn't work from a supplementational perspective. You need to get it through your food. So I did a super deep dive around supplements like strontium, which is one that people might not have heard of, boron, vitamin K, vitamin D, magnesium, potassium, collagen. I realized the RDA for potassium, which I didn't know at the time, it's a little over 3,500 milligrams a day, grams, I think grams a day. They always say you need potassium, just have a banana. A banana's got like 30 grams of potassium, right? It's got to be like 30 bananas in order to get, enough potassium. So potassium and magnesium are a huge focus. And then, I really started focusing on, tensile strength is the other side of it in order to make sure if I do fall, I'm not going to break anything. But really, it was really about, accelerating my weight training, modifying my diet, getting 90% of my calcium through my food. So
I'm going to stop you. What are you eating? What's the
well, my kind of go-to is kale in my smoothies, and I never drank kale in smoothies before. So I put like half a, Whole Foods pack of kale in a smoothie. It's a good boost for my calcium. I use a milk called macadamia, which is just amazing. It's got like 300 milligrams of potassium, 300 of calcium. It's all natural from macadamia milk, and it's got about 300 grams per serving of calcium in it, and it's and zero sugar. So it's fantastic. So I use that. I use that for everything. And then lastly, David, I went on a drug called Reclast, Reclast, medically known as zoleic acid, and it's a once-a-year infusion. It's the only drug available for men that's been FDA cleared. So, that's how, out in the wilderness we are. They couldn't, even though there were probably better drugs, this is the one for me. And I've been on it for 4 years. And literally, I've increased my bone density results by, depending on where we're measuring, spine, femur, hip, anywhere from 10 to 15%. And everyone's just going, WTF, how did that happen? So I'm super happy about that. It gives me more confidence when I'm moving.
Don't go anywhere. We'll get right back with Craig in just a moment after a quick message from our sponsors.
You know by now, I'm a huge fan of anything that helps us recover faster, sleep better, and feel more energized without piling on more effort. This one checks all the boxes. The infrared PEMF mat from Bond Charge is one of the best tools I found for at-home recovery. You're getting the benefits of infrared heat, red light, negative ions, and PEMF all in one place. I use it after training or just to decompress at the end of the day, and I can tell you it works. Whether it's muscle soreness, stress, or just giving your body the signal to heal, this thing is a game changer. Use code AGEIST15 at checkout for 15% off at bondcharge.com. That's code AGEIST15 for 15% off the Bond Charge PEMF mat. Today's show is brought to you by Timeline Nutrition and their product MitoPure. I started taking MitoPure after I ran their science through our science review board, and they were very enthusiastic about it. In fact, most of the people on my science advisory board and their families now take MitoPure. So why do I take MitoPure? I take it basically for health span because, the truth is, I want to be 90 and I want to be able to ski and hike and play and do all the things I do now. Think of MitoPure as these little Pac-Men in your cells, chomping up the damaged mitochondria that make you feel old and tired and recycling them into new, healthy ones. And mitochondria are our cell's power generators. They're a key influence in how we age. However, as the years pass, and I've passed a few years, mitochondrial efficiency naturally declines, representing a large gap in the quality of life we can expect in our later years from the ones we actually experience. So do what I do, and do what my science advisory board does. We take it every day. You're going to notice a difference in 4 to 6 weeks. Timeline is offering 10% off your first order of MitoPure. Go to timeline.com/ageist. That's TIMELINE.com/ageist. Get 10% off.
This is super interesting. I had a DEXA last week and my hips have dropped into osteopenia. I'm
Okay.
firmly in the middle of osteopenia.
Yeah,
And I have a knee issue, so I haven't been doing much impact. Well, as soon as I saw that DEXA, that changed.
totally. Yeah.
So I do 40 jumps a day off a stair
Yep.
and I don't absorb. I just bang
Perfect.
as hard as I can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have impact.
Yeah.
From the perspective of the metabolic pathway for building bone, you have to have impact. So walking's not good enough. Cycling is not good enough. Swimming is not good enough. And I love doing all of those, but I have a focus program around my bone health.
I had Dr. Mike Roizen on. I've had him on here a few times. And Mike's head of wellness at the Cleveland Clinic, and he said every day 40 jumps off a stair,
Yeah.
and that's what I do. But I'm now going to add kale and macadamia milk
Good.
because I've heard the same thing as you, that the supplementing with calcium is like it's sort of a different thing than getting it from food. It doesn't work the same way. So you really want to get it from food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, importantly for us and everybody out there, I mean, it increases your risk of both stroke and cardiovascular event. And so, you can get up to 1,000, look, the RDA, for what that's worth, 1,000 grams a day. You can get that from, 200 from calcium supplements, but just make sure you get the rest through food. And
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to track. You don't need MyFitnessPal or anything to scan barcodes. Just look on labels. It's in there. But I would say don't get the calcium enhanced foods or any products that are calcium enhanced, naturally producing like macadamia milk and kale, as I suggest.
How's cow milk? I have some idea, like, people were told to, like, drink cow milk and eat dairy for
Yeah,
calcium. Does that
yeah,
is that true?
yeah. I mean, literally, the last 6 months, I've just started drinking cow's milk again. So, obviously, organic, none of the bovine hormones, and there's A2 brand is
Yeah.
out, which is pretty popular, which I've done a lot of research on. So yeah, I just use that, sort of alternate between that and macadamia milk because it's not going to do us any harm, right?
Talking about this cardiovascular disease, so the normal sort of tests that I hear about, and you wanna get your blood pressure done. I just had my VO2 max done.
Yep.
I just wanna flex here, 48.
Dude,
So,
that's remind me how old you are?
I'm 66.
Yeah, that's crazy. You are the superior band on the Garmin. Yeah, yeah.
The guy was really funny. We were doing the test. It's a very unpleasant 12-minute
I know, I've
test.
done it. Yeah,
It's a terrible where you
yeah.
get a mask and shit. And I got as far as 320 watts on the bike, and he's like, "Wow, like, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I do Swedish 4x4s once a week,
Yep,
and
yep, exactly.
and and that shit works."
Yeah,
Yeah, so there's that, and then there's the calcium CT scans of the
yep.
heart. What are the other ones that you're looking at?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of them out there. I mean, we make a home cardiovascular assessment test that has a suite of very unique biomarkers around arterial stiffness, around central blood pressures, which is the pressures felt at your heart, not your arm. I mean, traditionally, your arm pressure has been a surrogate for measuring central pressure. But unfortunately, until we developed this technology, the only way you could measure that was through an A line, usually in an ICU setting. So we have a technology that measures central pressures. And the reason why it's more impactful is because of its proximity to the major organs. So we can, through measuring what's called pulse waves, we can sort of slice in and dice out the outputs of those pulse waves and report biomarkers such as central pressure, such as arterial stiffness, such as central pulse pressures, which are the pressures felt at the major organs, so the brain, the kidneys, the placenta during maternal health, for example. And then uniquely, we have another biomarker called SEVR, SEVR, which is kind of like VO2 max. So, as you know, VO2 max measures your ability to perform exercise under load. So, what SEVR does, it measures the ability of your heart to process oxygen under load. So, think of it like this way: VO2 max would say, how far you can go. SEVR tells you whether your heart can keep up with you.
That's a good thing to know.
We have a home cardiovascular test under Connect Health. That's Connect with a QT at the end, which provides, FDA cleared biomarkers for measuring very unique biomarkers that present themselves way earlier in your health span than, for example, something like a coronary calcium score.
Mm.
So much more predictive of, end-cause mortality, much more predictive of cardiovascular risk, up to 4 times more predictive. So, we market that to, consumers and to, our physician partners and our pharmaceutical company partners as well. But you mentioned calcium score. It's interesting because when you look at calcium score is a measure of calcification at a point in time. Calcium scores will never tell you and cannot tell you whether you are at risk for calcification.
Right.
So the important thing in what we do is that when, so in terms of we sit in that lifespan, we allow much earlier detection of your risk of calcification through measuring arterial stiffness. So, and we can do that anywhere from sort of like, a month to 3 years before calcification presents itself. So once you have calcification, David, you can't get rid of it.
Yeah, that's it.
It's literally a snapshot in time. And it can guide further treatments and dietary interventions and lifestyle, but it's not predictive in terms of what your risk is of getting calcification. So that's a big hole that we've filled with what we're doing with what's called this our Sphygma core technology, which has been in the market for 20 years. We've had 23,000 papers in PubMed which reference us. So we're now just bringing it through my investment involvement over the last 4 to 5 years, bringing it to the public markets. Whereas in the past, it's really been pharmaceutical companies and research institutions that have used it. So excited about that. Super impactful. So hopefully you're going to be hearing a lot more about that. Yeah. So we see a lot of coronary calcification score tests. We're seeing a lot of new and novel biomarkers such as, ApoB, which is a cholesterol marker, HSCRP, homocysteine, C-reactive protein, which is also being used. The other sort of breakout test at the moment is being done by Clearly, if you know the
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
So Clearly, just for your listeners, if they don't know, cardiac MRI with contrast. But what the difference is that they overlay, a multi-thousand, research-based AI algorithm on top of it in order to give sort of more effective diagnostics around it. So it's traditionally not covered by insurance. It works out at about $2,000. So, most of that's out of pocket. So, not really available to the kind of, I would say non 1%ers. It's really, priced itself, out of the market. So let's see how they go. Cardiac stress tests, which you've done, VO2 max, which you've done. There's other genetic screenings that you can do. But, mostly, for me, when I'm asked sort of like what the waterfall looks like from the perspective of screening, obviously a lot of lifestyle aspects, it's traditional things, weight loss, smoking, alcohol, like everything. I mean, literally, we shouldn't drink at all. We know that, and it impacts everything. So, it's all the lifestyle factors. But the main point, as you point out, and what we're trying to do, we're trying to monitor better and earlier, but we're also trying to educate and communicate, which is the most important thing. Because as I said at the top of the call, we are told that you don't have to get a colonoscopy until you're 55, unless there's a risk of colon cancer in the family. It's the same with prostate cancer. Don't get a DRE, no need to get your PSA done until you're 55. It's like ridiculous. I got my PSA done when I was 40 and my PSA was 5. Okay. 5. In the traditional funnel, that would just be, Gleason score 50% of the time of, 6 and above with prostate cancer. I got put down this funnel of biopsies after that diagnosis for the course of, over 10 years. And still to this date, and I saw my urologist last week, thankfully, I still don't have prostate cancer or any sign of it. But I did have what's called high-grade PIN, prostatic intraepithelial neoplasia, which was precancerous cells in my prostate. What it did when I was 40, it took me down a path of prevention around prostate health. So it became again, a laser focus that I had when I was 40, like when I was, in my late 50s, I tipped over into osteoporotic. It became a laser focus. So still to this date, my PSA is still 5, but I don't have prostate cancer. I just think historically, genetically, I have an inflammation gene that across the board impacts me. So we just need to get ahead of this. I have to drag people in to get a colonoscopy. When my business partner was 58, he still hadn't had a colonoscopy, had a young family. And, my message is always, if not for you, do it for your family, right? Because every time my mom died of it, my brother-in-law died of it in his early 50s. So every time I go in to have a colonoscopy, they're like snipping something off. So the traditional medical paradigm would have me wait another 5 years. Every 2 years, I just fake symptoms. I go in and they find something else. Yeah. It's scary. So all you men out there, get your literal ass in there and get your PSA tested, have a colonoscopy done, and, really start focusing on the testing that matters as you age.
Random question here. First, I want to tell everybody the number one cause of death is cardiovascular.
Totally. Yeah.
So pay attention to that.
Number one killer worldwide. Number one, obviously, killer in the United States. 19 million deaths a year in the United States. It's responsible for 33% of deaths globally, vascular related, cardiovascular related diseases. So cardiovascular disease, specifically when you look at focus on the heart, but vascular diseases, which impact your kidney, impact your brain, anything that really is responsible for receiving, nutrients and oxygen specifically is, within that number. And, obviously, Alzheimer's seen more and more as a vascular disease. So we're working a lot with Alzheimer's Association and other groups in terms of providing diagnostics into the pathway of treatment for patients with early stage onset Alzheimer's, measuring their pulse pressures and their vascular health at the brain non-invasively. So yeah, I mean, it's frustrating when we talk about longevity because you really can't have a discussion around longevity without focusing on arterial health, right? And like the messaging is always around, whether it's, everyone's got their own, corner of the internet. The main influences, Dr. Amen's always talking about the principal driver of longevity is racket sports, being able to play pickleball. It's like, seriously, dude, Peter Attia, it's all about VO2 max, right? Huberman's all about muscle mass. David Sinclair, insulin resistance. Rhonda Patrick just says what everyone else is saying. No one's, it's part of the layers which they talk about, but it should be the number one thing that they're talking about, because how can you talk about longevity without talking about the world's biggest killer, right? What more is impactful? Anyway,
Just on that, I wanted your thoughts on something that really a lot of what we're talking about here is vascular elasticity.
yep.
And I started doing BFR about, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago.
Okay. Remind me what that is.
Blood flow restriction.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes what I do is I have a couple different systems of these things. One I have is called Katsu, and
I've seen it. Yeah.
I'll just put it on like on my legs, like for a half hour before I go to bed. It's just sort of very gentle thing. And the studies that I've read out of Japan is that's the name of the game there. So you're forcing that elasticity in the capillaries and forcing capillary growth. And maybe that's why my VO2 max is so high. I don't know.
Yeah. Look, I should have, but I haven't researched it that much. But
Everybody's got a thing, as you
yeah,
said.
for sure. But I would say foundationally, there's positives and negatives of vasodilation. We want to promote it as much as possible. And there's supplements like nitric oxide, for example, and beets, and which you can use from a supplementation perspective. Infrared saunas do the same thing. The problem was that if you do have a risk of cardiovascular disease, you want to be really careful around supplementation. You want to be really careful about saunas, for example, because particularly if you're doing, hot cold rotations, it's, the studies are pretty clear around the negative impact of, saunas, one, and also more specifically, hot cold rotations. And then that also parlays into ice baths, because you get a super deep dive around my perspective on ice baths. But the sound bite is anything which puts vascular stress on you. If you're at risk of vascular disease, sure, you should be super cautious about. So both heat and cold. So yeah, just be careful. And, when you look at the stats, one that I left out, David, was, from a population wide perspective in the United States, it's, it's pretty much exact on 50% of the US adult population that is hypertensive. So about 20% of that is diagnosed and the rest is undiagnosed. So
Yeah.
particularly living with a ticking time bomb. So it's an incredibly high number. So, when I see all the influencers, talking about, plunging and, cures cancer and, cut recovery and, cure Alzheimer's, it's like drives me insane. It does a few things. It doesn't do a lot of things. So just be careful, specifically if you have, hypertension or you're at risk of, cardiovascular disease.
Well, first thing is test your blood pressure.
Totally.
Like There
Yeah.
are very few things. I mean, this is like the easiest thing to do. You can buy a cuff. It's like 15 bucks.
Yeah.
You just test it at home like once a week.
Yeah.
And then if you're hypertensive, there are also fewer, more powerful risk factors to your mortality than high blood pressure.
100%.
So
Yeah. Buy one of our blood pressure machines, we should say.
yes, exactly. Exactly. That's right. I'm sorry.
And actually, it's a little bit of a segue because I actually have super low blood pressure. So I have what's
Ah,
called orthostatic hypotension. So one of the reasons that I pulled out of Spartan racing, even though I was doing pretty well as an age group, mainly because no other, guys my age were turning up. I was like podiuming.
always win.
Exactly. Participate. And that's, you're 90% there. So, I'm now through my cardiologist experimenting because I'm not 100% taking her advice on this, experimenting with sort of super sodium intake. So, element,
Super sodium.
yeah.
What's super sodium?
Well, it's about 4,000 milligrams a day.
Okay.
Yeah. So particularly if, mountain biking but, element, as we know, it's got, 1,000 milligrams, right?
Or
And,
those.
I love
Wow.
the science around it. I've been on their website and I've gone through all that and I kind of went down that rabbit hole and I can see the science around it. But again, I would caution because the first thing the cardiologist will tell you if you're at risk and if you're hypertensive is to cut back on your sodium. But we're actually trying to get my blood pressure higher. So I'm just accelerating sodium and I'm bringing compression socks back again at my gym.
I love compression
Yeah.
socks.
Yeah.
Oh, they're the best.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like there's a trend there that I'm going to bring back.
They're great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy walking into Whole Foods with them, and it's my new sporting look is compression socks. So
Oh, yeah, they make me feel great. I'm not a doctor. Don't listen to me for medical advice, but taking that level of sodium, you probably want to keep watch out on your calcium.
totally, yeah. Problem is it leaches. The more I take, the more potential I have for leaching calcium. So it's a super focus on that biomarker. And look, I'm experimenting, and I'm with the advice. But when I get my next labs done in the next couple of weeks, I'll make a decision around it. And I'm going to end up, probably, just dialing back to a normal range because I don't care. The lifestyle aspects that impact me from having low blood pressure aren't really that great. And everywhere else I'm fine. So I really don't want to, you know, play with that sort of trigger too much. Yeah. I think it's probably got more harmful than positive.
Yeah, 4 element packets a day. That's a boatload.
Yeah.
That's
I will
so
say that's
bad.
on my training days. So 2,000 of those will get sort of sucked up in training if I'm out, mostly when I'm mountain biking.
Craig, it's been wonderful having you on here. Tell us again the name of your new company.
It's called Connect Health, CONNEQT, Connect Health.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's always great to have these
Yeah, it's
conversations
great
with
to
you.
see you, David.
I really appreciate it. There's a well-deserved resurgence of interest around women's health, which has sort of been in the dark ages forever, and I think that's great.
Yeah,
But there's also very specific issues around men our age that
totally.
maybe aren't being
Yeah.
talked about. Yeah.
Like, and even when I listen to, yeah, David, it's like even the medical influences, right? I mean, look, half of them aren't doctors either. Technically they are, but, doctor of neuroscience, doctors of psychology, doctors of chiropractor, they're now, sources of wisdom for everything health, right? And let's not forget, you know, 80% of them didn't study medicine. Whether you're a neuroscientist, where I'm calling out people like Dr. Humerman or Dr. Eric Burke, with nearly 20 million followers, who's effectively a chiropractor. We got to be really careful who we listen to, right? Because everyone's, trying to find their corner of the internet, massive economics behind it. Health's being politicized more and more, particularly with the new administration, if I can say so, because going down, a different path with that from the point of view of human health services. So we have to be really vigilant around who we listen to. We need to research a lot on our own. And I think
Mhm,
we should do in everyday life, listen to both sides and then,
mhm.
make a determination based on, really based on the studies, what's working. And, people ask, who's my medical influencer? I like to say PubMed, right?
Yeah.
That's where we should live because I think everything else is, mostly noise and hard to really get through to the truth, just given the economics around the creator economy and how social media really, leverages it.
I have a lot of thoughts on that stuff. Do not get your medical advice from TikTok. Just saying.
Exactly.
Not a good idea.
That's the short
And
answer. Yeah.
yeah, and that even if someone is a physician, I want them to be a clinician.
Totally.
There's an
Yeah.
enormous difference
Yeah.
between a clinician and a researcher. Clinician has a fiduciary obligation to people's health, and they see this stuff every day.
100%.
They're going to be a better source of information than a doctorate of philosophy
Yeah.
talking about something or other.
David, I've even been to doctors and, I've walked out and I've gone, what did I actually learn in there? Or did I actually teach that guy like more than
Yeah.
he told me?
Craig, wonderful having you on.
Thanks, David.
Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Take care now. What a wealth of information from Craig Cooper, from bone density, vascular health, and this never-ending myth of male invincibility. Hey guys, we are not invincible. And how we each need to be the CEO of our own biology. We're in charge. Let's not forget, get your PSA, get your colonoscopy. I know it's no fun, but you just got to do it. And maybe, just maybe, start jumping off those last steps of stairs. So this is something that I've been doing now every day for a couple of weeks. It just 40 jumps off that lowest step, boom, I hit hard because I want the impact. I want to start rebuilding the bones in my hips. So, lesson learned. Also, for anyone looking to learn about themselves and what life in midlife can be and looking forward what it could be, maybe get a little out of your comfort zone and hey, just have a good time. My good friend Rebecca Rusch and I will be hosting a week-long experience at Chip Connolly's MEA, Modern Elder Academy at the Santa Fe, New Mexico campus. That's May 26th through the 31st. Now, Rebecca, you may know, is a Hall of Fame athlete. And I've been doing this health span thing for a little over a decade now. And together, we're going to be covering all the bases, including how to decode sleep and recovery, what actually works after 40, mastering some strength training, how to upgrade our bodies essentially, learn some nutritional strategies, develop some cardio approaches. I mean, she's like the best in the world, right? World champion. We're going to talk about that. We're going to tackle some of these deeper questions about midlife purpose and trajectory, along with the MEA staff, who are best in class at this. They've done thousands of these. They're the people you want to go to if you're having questions about what is this whole, as Chip says, liminal period? What does it lead to? Where are we going? We're going to build some physical practices that unlock some boundless energy for you guys and everything else that matters. And something to keep in mind, it's ideal for all fitness levels. We've all had challenges. Rebecca's coming back from a pretty bad concussion. I once spent, not that long ago, a year in a hospital and my knee's kind of wonky. So bring the person you are, and we all work with what we got. We do adjustments. We don't do excuses. If you're interested, I just want to be clear, this is not some kind of march to baton thing. This is going to be fun. It's going to be easy. And, it's MEA, so it's going to be great. If you're interested in learning more, visit meawisdom.com/enroll and look for the course Super Age Fitness. We'll also link to this in the show notes. So this week I am in Manhattan, New York City, Lower East Side. I just feel like I live in the coolest neighborhood on earth. I am just so blessed to be here. I've been thinking a lot about our capacity and what we think is possible. And I just want to say a little bit about Lindsey Vonn. Now, I'm a ski racer. Level set, I'm not a good ski racer, but it's something that I do. Now, Lindsey Vonn is a three-time Olympic ski racer, and she retired at the age of 34 from a lot of knee injuries. And then last year, at this time, she had a uni done, which is a single compartment of the knee. She has an artificial knee, essentially. And she's 40 years old. And 2 weeks ago, she stood on the podium. So that in ski race talk, that means you're one of the top three. She was number 2 in the world racing Super G at Sun Valley, the World Cup. Now, I want you guys to understand what this is like. This would be like, John McEnroe coming in, number 2 at Wimbledon or something. It's just like unbelievable. It's incredible to me. First of all, that she's the oldest woman ever to podium. She took 6 years off. She didn't practice for 6 years, and half her knee is bionic. It's artificial. Like all of those things, you put those together and you say, no way. Like, is this woman like able to like walk properly? But amazing. So Lindsey Vonn, I just also want to level set is there are Olympians and then there are people like Lindsey. And Olympians are just sort of a class above normal human. And then there are these sort of very rare types that are really sort of once in a decade, once in a century sort of athletes. And she's one of those. I know We have the Winter Olympics coming up next year in Cortina in Italy. It's one of her favorite hills to race on. You never know what's going to happen, but I'm on Team Vaughn. I find her so inspiring, and it's maybe because she's, I don't know, I was raised by a single mom, so female athletes, I don't know, that's just sort of my thing. I get so much inspiration from them. So I'm going to be watching that. And for all of you, so what's the lesson here? So the lesson is multifold with Lindsay. One, medical science is absolutely unbelievable now that she is able to perform at this level with a partial with a partial implanted knee is unbelievable. That she's 40 and is number 2 in the world. That's just absolutely extraordinary. And saying something about the determination and the grit of somebody like a Lindsey Vonn. And also want to bring something into this. She took a lot of shit about this. When she said she was going to go back to the US ski team, there was a lot of pressure out there. There was a lot of voices saying like, "Oh, just sit down, you're too old, give somebody else a chance." She took a lot of grief about this. And it's hard to fight that stuff off, and she did. So, for all you haters out there, you lose. Lindsay won.
Today's show is also brought to you by Our Place. I recently swapped out my old toxic kitchenware for Our Place's and couldn't be more satisfied. Not only are Our Place's pans and appliances beautifully crafted with a range of fun colors, they are also made without toxins and chemicals. We talk a lot about health and wellness on this show. One of the main things to do is remove toxins from your life. If you make it a priority to eat healthy food, make it a priority not to cook on unhealthy pans full of forever chemicals. Our Place has completely upped my kitchen game, along with many others. Just look at their 75,000 five-star reviews. Go to FromOurPlace.com, that's FROMOURPLACE.com, and enter the code AGEIST at checkout. You get 10% off site-wide. That's FromOurPlace.com, code AGEIST, and get this, Our Place offers a 100-day trial with free shipping and returns. Check it out and get those toxins out of your kitchen today.
All right, so this week, on Just Try This, we're going to talk about calcium. So as we mentioned in the episode, there's a big difference between calcium supplements and the calcium you get from food. Essentially, you really don't want to be taking calcium supplements unless your doctor tells you to. But you can get a ton of calcium from certain foods. For instance, Greek yogurt, macadamia milk, and kale. Kale has an extraordinary amount of calcium in it, almonds too. So as we think about getting, a little older, I'm 66, but I'm a pretty sporty guy. I had no idea that I was trending into osteopenia. So it turns out I got a Dexicam. I saw, and they're like, "Hey, you got to pay attention to this." So this is one of the things that I'm doing is really trying to up my calcium-rich food intake. So just try this week. See what you can do to get some calcium into your diet. Again, kale, macadamia milk, Greek yogurt, I think it's called A2. It's a certain kind of cow. I have some kefir in there, and I noticed you get 4 servings in a bottle, and each serving was like 300 grams of calcium. It's a lot of calcium. So totally easily doable. Make sure you get calcium, and make sure you get your vitamin D tested, because if your vitamin D is low, it's going to be very hard for you to make new bone. All right, that's Just Try This for this week. So if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. We love hearing from you. Reach out to us if you can. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.